What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a talk show stage, only to be met with disrespect so blatant that it shatters the entire interview? It only took 31 seconds of condescending remarks before Denzel Washington had enough and did what millions of viewers wish they could do. He walked off, leaving the host speechless and exposed. The stage was set like any other late-night talk show. Bright lights, a live studio audience buzzing with excitement, and cameras ready to capture what everyone assumed would be another entertaining celebrity interview. Denzel Washington, dressed sharply in a dark suit, walked out with his trademark calm confidence. The audience erupted in applause. This was a man who commanded respect everywhere he went. A two-time Academy Award winner known not just for his talent, but for his dignity and intelligence. Bill Maher sat behind his desk with that familiar smirk, the one that suggested he was always the smartest person in the room. He gestured for Denzel to take a seat on the couch, and as the applause died down, you could feel something in the air. It wasn't the usual warmth of a welcoming interview. There was tension, subtle but present. "Denzel Washington, everybody," Maher announced, clapping slowly. "You know, I've been wanting to get you on this show for years. Finally." Denzel smiled politely, nodding at the audience. "Good to be here, Bill." "Is it, though?" Maher said with a laugh, as if he'd just told the funniest joke. The audience gave an uncomfortable chuckle. Denzel's smile faded just slightly, but he maintained his composure. "I'm sorry?" Denzel asked calmly. "I mean, come on." Maher continued, leaning back in his chair with exaggerated casualness. "You do all these serious, intense movies. Training Day, Malcolm X, Fences. Don't you ever just want to do something fun? Something that doesn't require us to think so hard?" The audience laughed again, but this time it was more nervous than amused. Denzel shifted in his seat, his eyes narrowing just a fraction. "I think all of those films are fun in their own way," Denzel replied, his voice measured. "And I don't think asking audiences to think is ever a bad thing." Maher waved his hand dismissively. Yeah, art is important and all that. But let's be real. Most people just want to shut their brains off after a long day. They don't want to lecture." "I don't lecture anyone," Denzel said, his tone sharpening. "I tell stories. If people connect with them, that's their choice." Sure, Maher said, but his tone made it clear he wasn't really listening. "But here's what I really want to know. You've played all these tough guys, these heroes. Do you ever feel like you're just feeding into this, this narrative?" "What narrative?" Denzel asked, his patience clearly wearing thin. Maher leaned forward, and that smirk grew wider. "The whole, the angry guy thing, the tough, intense, serious black man. Don't you think that's kind of limiting?" The studio went silent. You could hear people in the audience shifting in their seats. Denzel stared at Maher for a long moment, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Limiting," Denzel repeated slowly, like he was tasting the word and finding it bitter. "Yeah," Maher continued, "oblivious or perhaps deliberately obtuse. I mean, wouldn't it be nice to see you do something different? Play a regular guy? Someone who isn't always so, heavy?" Denzel took a breath, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "Bill, I've played doctors, lawyers, coaches, soldiers, fathers, sons. I've done comedies, dramas, action films, period pieces. The only person putting me in a box right now is you." Maher laughed, but it was forced. "Oh, come on, don't be so sensitive. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." "No," Denzel said, sitting up straighter. "You're saying what you're thinking, and that's the problem." The audience started to murmur. Some people clapped in support of Denzel. Maher's face flushed slightly, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. "Look, I'm just trying to have an honest conversation here," Maher said, his voice taking on a defensive edge. "That's what this show is about, honesty. No sacred cows." "There's a difference between honesty and disrespect," Denzel replied. "And right now, you're crossing that line." Maher scoffed. "Disrespect? I invited you on my show. I'm giving you a platform. How is that disrespectful?" "A platform?" Denzel's voice rose slightly, the first crack in his composed demeanor. "You invited me here to belittle my work and reduce my entire career to a stereotype. That's not a platform. That's an ambush." "Oh, here we go," Maher said, rolling his eyes dramatically. "Everything's an ambush. Everything's offensive. Can't say anything anymore without someone getting their feelings hurt." The audience's murmurs grew louder. Several people booed. Denzel stood up from the couch, and the entire studio seemed to hold its breath. "My feelings aren't hurt, Bill," Denzel said, his voice steady and powerful. "I'm just not going to sit here and let you disrespect me on national television for your entertainment." Maher's eyes widened. He clearly hadn't expected this. "Whoa, whoa, whoa. Sit down. We're in the middle of an interview." "No," Denzel said simply. "We're done." "You can't just leave," Maher said, his voice climbing higher. "We have 12 more minutes. We haven't even gone to commercial." "Then I suggest you figure out how to fill those 12 minutes, Denzel replied. He started to walk toward the edge of the stage. Maher stood up from behind his desk, his composure completely shattered. "This is ridiculous. You're being childish." Denzel stopped and turned back. The look on his face was one of pure disappointment mixed with controlled anger. "Childish? I came here in good faith. I showed you respect. And you repaid that by trying to make me look small so you could feel big. That's not journalism. That's not comedy. That's just sad." The audience erupted in applause and cheers. Several people stood up. Maher's face went from red to pale in seconds. "I was just joking around," Maher said weakly. "It's a comedy show. Can't you take a joke?" "A joke is supposed to be funny," Denzel said. "That wasn't a joke. That was you revealing exactly who you are." With that, Denzel turned and walked off the stage. The cameras followed him as he moved past the stunned crew members, past the producers, frantically whispering into headsets, and straight out the studio door. The audience was on their feet now, some cheering, some shocked into silence. Maher stood alone on his stage, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He tried to laugh it off, tried to make a comment to save face, but nothing came out that didn't sound desperate or pathetic. "Well, Maher," stammered, looking at his producers in the wings. I guess we'll go to commercial." But the damage was done. The cameras had captured everything. The audience had seen everything. And in that moment, Bill Maher's carefully constructed image of being the fearless truth-teller, the guy who could say anything to anyone, crumbled completely. Because here's what really happened on that stage. It wasn't about political correctness or sensitivity or any of the buzzwords that Maher might later try to hide behind. It was about one simple thing: respect. Denzel Washington came to that show as a guest, as someone who had achieved more in his career than most people could dream of. He deserved to be treated with dignity. Instead, Maher saw him as a target, someone to prod and poke and diminish, someone whose accomplishments could be reduced to stereotypes for a cheap laugh, someone who would just sit there and take it because that's what guests are supposed to do. But Denzel Washington is not most people. He's someone who understands his value, who knows his worth, and who refuses to compromise his dignity for anyone's entertainment. And when faced with disrespect, he did the one thing that Maher never expected. He left. Let's rewind and look at exactly how this unraveled. From the very first moment, Maher's approach was condescending. That opening line, "Is it though?" When Denzel said it was good to be there, set the tone immediately. It was dismissive, sarcastic, and signaled that this wasn't going to be a conversation between equals. It was going to be Maher trying to dominate. Then came the attack on Denzel's film choices. Calling his serious work something that requires audiences to think so hard wasn't a compliment. It was an insult wrapped in faux concern. It suggested that Denzel's movies were pretentious, that they were work to watch, that they were somehow less valuable than lighter fare. Denzel tried to redirect, to explain his perspective on storytelling. But Maher wasn't interested in understanding. He was interested in scoring points. And that's when he went for the lowest blow, reducing Denzel's entire career to a racial stereotype. The phrase, "the angry guy thing," and the tough, intense, serious black man wasn't analysis. It was reduction. It was taking a man who had played dozens of different characters across multiple genres and flattening him into a single, racially charged caricature. And Maher knew exactly what he was doing. You could see it in his face, in that smirk. He thought he was being edgy. He thought he was pushing boundaries. But really, he was just being small. He was trying to make himself look clever by making his guests look one-dimensional. And when Denzel called him out, when Denzel explained the breadth and depth of his career, Maher's response was telling. Don't be so sensitive. It's the same tired defense that people use when they get caught saying something indefensible. Instead of acknowledging the problem, they attack the person for having the audacity to object. This is where you could see Denzel's patience running out. His voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. You're saying what you're thinking, and that's the problem. It was a perfectly crafted response that exposed the entire issue. Maher had assumed that his thoughts, his reductive views, were universal, and Denzel was pointing out that they weren't. But Maher couldn't let it go. His ego wouldn't allow it. So he kept pushing. I'm giving you a platform, as if appearing on his show was some kind of favor, some gift that Denzel should be grateful for. As if Denzel Washington, a man who had won every major acting award and had been in the industry for over 4 decades, needed Bill Maher to give him legitimacy. That's when Denzel stood up, and the power dynamic completely shifted. Suddenly, Maher wasn't in control anymore. The guest he thought he could push around was refusing to play along, and Maher panicked. You can't just leave, except Denzel could, and he did. Because unlike Maher, Denzel understood that he didn't owe anyone his presence if they couldn't treat him with basic respect. He wasn't contractually obligated to sit there and be insulted. He wasn't required to smile and nod while someone tried to tear him down. Watch Maher's face in that moment. The confusion, the anger, the desperation. He called Denzel childish, which was perhaps the most revealing comment of all. Because what's actually childish is thinking you can say whatever you want without consequences. What's childish is believing that your position as a host gives you the right to disrespect your guests. What's childish is throwing a tantrum when someone refuses to be your punching bag. Denzel's final words were perfect. That wasn't a joke. That was you revealing exactly who you are. It wasn't angry. It wasn't a comeback designed for applause. It was simply the truth, delivered, with the weight of someone who had seen through the facade. And then he left. No storming off, no dramatic gestures, just a quiet, dignified exit that spoke volumes. The audience knew what they'd witnessed. They'd seen someone stand up for themselves in real time. They'd seen someone refuse to be diminished, and they responded with standing applause. Meanwhile, Maher was left alone on his stage, exposed. All the wit, all the clever comebacks, all the rehearsed zingers meant nothing in that moment. He'd been called out, and he had no response. His attempt to joke it off fell flat. His stammering about going to commercial was pathetic. Because here's the thing about people like Maher. They build their entire persona on being untouchable, on being the one who can say anything to anyone and get away with it. They confuse cruelty with honesty, and they mistake arrogance for confidence. But when someone like Denzel Washington, someone with actual dignity and self-respect, stands up to them, the whole illusion collapses. This wasn't just a bad interview. This was a masterclass in setting boundaries. Denzel didn't yell. He didn't curse. He didn't make threats. He simply stated his position clearly, and when that wasn't respected, he removed himself from the situation. That's real strength. That's real power. And the contrast couldn't be more stark. On one side, you had Denzel, calm, articulate, firm in his convictions. On the other, you had Maher, flustered, defensive, unable to handle the consequences of his own words. One man walked away with his dignity intact. The other was left scrambling to salvage his ego. The audience reaction told the whole story. They weren't applauding because Denzel made a great comeback. They were applauding because they'd just witnessed someone do what so many people wish they could do in their own lives. Refuse to accept disrespect. Stand up for themselves. Walk away from toxicity. Think about how many times you've watched interviews where the guest is clearly uncomfortable, where the host is clearly crossing lines, but the guest just smiles and bears it because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be a good sport. You're supposed to play along. You're supposed to let the host have their fun at your expense because that's the game. But Denzel changed the game. He said, "No, I'm not playing this." And in doing so, he showed millions of people watching that you don't have to accept mistreatment just because someone has a microphone and a platform. You don't have to sacrifice your dignity for someone else's entertainment. Maher tried to frame it as Denzel being unable to take a joke, but everyone watching knew that wasn't true. Denzel has been in this business for decades. He's done press tours, late-night shows, interviews with tough journalists. He knows how to handle difficult questions. He knows how to deal with provocative hosts. But there's a difference between provocative and disrespectful, and Maher crossed that line repeatedly. The "I'm giving you a platform" comment was especially galling, as if Bill Maher's show was the pinnacle of cultural relevance, as if Denzel Washington needed Bill Maher more than Bill Maher needed Denzel Washington. The reality is, Maher's show benefited far more from having an A-list actor of Denzel's caliber than Denzel benefited from appearing on it, but Maher's ego couldn't see that. And that's really what this whole thing was about, ego. Maher's need to be the center of attention, to be the smartest guy in the room, to prove that he could take on anyone. But he picked the wrong person. He thought he could reduce Denzel Washington to a soundbite, to a stereotype, to a target for his routine. And Denzel showed him exactly how wrong he was. The moment Denzel stood up, you could see the shift in power. Suddenly, Maher wasn't the host anymore. He wasn't the one in control. He was just a man who had pushed too far and was facing the consequences. His voice got higher, more desperate. He started making demands. Sit down. We're in the middle of an interview. But demands only work if the other person accepts your authority. And Denzel didn't. We're done. 2 words that changed everything. Not, I'm done, but we're done. It was inclusive, it was final, and it was undeniable. There was no negotiation. There was no room for argument. The interview was over because Denzel said it was over. Maher's response, calling Denzel childish, was pure projection. What's childish is insulting your guest and then getting upset when they don't sit there and take it. What's childish is hiding behind "it's just comedy" when your words have consequences. What's childish is being unable to handle criticism while dishing it out freely. Denzel's exit was the exact opposite of childish. It was adult. It was measured. It was someone making a clear decision about their boundaries and following through. No drama, no hysterics, just a simple, "I'm not doing this," and the action to back it up. The cameras following Denzel as he walked out told their own story. The crew didn't know what to do. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't planned. Live television had just gotten very, very real, and everyone watching could feel it. Think about what Denzel gave up in that moment. He could have stayed. He could have finished the interview, smiled through the rest of it, collected his appearance fee, and moved on. No one would have blamed him. That's what most people do. That's the professional thing to do, right? Wrong. The professional thing to do is to maintain your standards. The dignified thing to do is to refuse to participate in your own degradation. And that's exactly what Denzel did. He chose self-respect over politeness. He chose dignity over convenience. And in doing so, he sent a message that resonated far beyond that studio. The message was simple. Your platform doesn't give you permission to disrespect people. Your comedy doesn't justify cruelty. And if you can't treat your guests with basic human decency, you don't deserve to have them. Maher stood there, trying to process what had just happened. His show, his stage, his rules. Except suddenly, none of that mattered. Because Denzel had exercised the ultimate power, the power to leave. And Maher couldn't stop him. I guess we'll go to commercial. It was the most defeated sentence ever spoken on that stage. All the bravado, all the confidence, all the swagger, gone. Replaced by a desperate need to cut away, to stop the cameras, to end the moment before it got any worse. But it was already worse. The audience had seen everything. They'd watched their host try to bully a guest. They'd watched that guest stand up for himself. And they'd watched their host crumble when faced with real consequences. This is what happens when you build your career on punching down. When you mistake meanness for wit. When you confuse being provocative with being profound. Eventually, you run into someone who won't play along, someone who has enough self-worth to walk away. And when that happens, all your tricks and tactics mean nothing. Denzel Washington walked off that stage with his head high and his reputation intact. In fact, his reputation was enhanced. He showed the world that he's not just a great actor. He's a man of principle, a man who knows his value, a man who won't compromise his dignity for anyone. Bill Maher, on the other hand, was left to deal with the fallout of his own making. He'd wanted a memorable interview. He got one, just not in the way he intended. Instead of looking clever or edgy, he looked small and petty. Instead of seeming fearless, he seemed reckless. Instead of appearing as a truth teller, he was exposed as someone who hides cruelty behind comedy. The standing ovation Denzel received from the audience as he walked out wasn't just applause, it was vindication. It was support. It was dozens of people saying, "Yes, you did the right thing. Yes, you should have walked away. Yes, we see exactly what happened here." And that's why this moment matters. Not because it was dramatic, though it certainly was. Not because it was unexpected, though it definitely caught everyone off guard, but because it was a reminder that respect is non-negotiable. That dignity matters. that you don't have to accept mistreatment just because someone has a bigger microphone. Denzel Washington could have stayed. He could have argued. He could have tried to win the debate. But he did something smarter and more powerful. He refused to participate. He took away Maher's toy. He ended the game. And in doing so, he won in the most complete way possible. Because 31 seconds of condescending remarks was all it took to reveal everything. Everything about who Maher really is. Everything about who Denzel really is. And everything about the difference between someone who demands respect and someone who deserves it.